Hmm. What is something that could get me a lot of YouTube views? A cute puppy? A cute child? I don't even know who I am anymore. Welcome to another episode of Anchor's Points. On today's episode, we're going to be talking with author Garrett K Jones, who has self-published 4 novels and has another one on the way. Garrett also has his own YouTube channel and website, which I will leave links to in the description below. On Garrett's YouTube channel, he also has interviews with authors. Sounds kind of familiar, but does he have a puppy? I hope you enjoyed this interview with Garrett K Jones as much as I did. All right, Garrett, so thanks for joining us today. How's it going over there?
It's going pretty well. Like I said, it's a little warm today. It's in triple digits here in Central California, but it's not terrible. I'm indoors. It's air conditioned. We're good.
Awesome. Yeah, I got some triple digit action here in Texas too.
Oh, I do not miss that humidity.
I'm really happy to have you on the show today. You know, you are very similar to me in the sense that you have your own YouTube channel and you've been interviewing a whole bunch of different writers. And I've just been checking out your channel for the past few weeks. You know, I was wondering, when you set up your interviews with your authors, right? You break your show down into seasons, right?
I break everything down into seasons. Right now I'm coming to the tail end of my second season. And so what I do is each month I do 4 segments. The way that it kind of plays out is that the very beginning of the month, I go in, I start talking about what I have coming up that month, as well as doing like a top 10 list, which is kind of a new segment that I started a few months ago.
Right.
And so the top 10, I'll go over like top 10 fantasy reads or top 10 comedy reads, something like that, and provide that list for any of my viewers to go through and check out with ISBN numbers and everything. Then the interviews themselves actually take place the second week of the month. And I usually find my authors via Instagram or Twitter, depending on, my first season, I leaned more heavily towards Twitter because there was a larger writing community there.
Yes.
But I've connected with more of those authors through Instagram. And so I've tried to be more balanced in where I'm pulling from. And then the third week of the month, I do Creator's Corner, which is a series of writing tips. So it started off as doing 2 writing tips, but the writing tips were really short, like below cursory, like summary levels.
Right.
There wasn't a whole lot of detail. And one of my author friends suggested I do more detail. So I would pick one and just kind of expand on that for about 10, 15 minutes or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And then the last segment is called Forming Fantasy, where I talk about my own writing and the inspirations that go into character creation, world building, stuff like that.
I mean, I was actually really impressed with the amount of videos that you put out and that, you have these ongoing segments. I just kind of started doing that with my channel recently, where I started to break it down into different shows. And, it's cool. I mean, you kind of were an inspiration for me.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I can honestly say that not many people have said that I'm an inspiration, so that's really encouraging for me.
When you interview writers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how long does that process take? And then how long does it take you to break down and edit those videos?
So it's kind of funny that you mentioned that because I just got finished this morning editing the interview that's going to go up on Saturday. And so what usually happens is about a month or so before the interview is going to take place, I send the author guidelines that allow them to see what I'm expecting of them. It provides them the questions and what I'm having to do, because I have them pre-record their answers and then send them to me via Google Drive, because it's just the fastest way. I go through and I download those. I put them into iMovie, and then I layer myself asking the questions pre-recorded.
Yeah.
And I use kind of a picture-in-picture format, kind of like what we're using right now. During the actual interview portion, I'm on screen for just like maybe a few seconds at a time, just asking the question. Then that image pops off and it's just them center screen and, answering the question to the best of their ability. And then, I end cap, or I bookend the whole interview with some stuff at the beginning and, stuff at the end. And usually the end of the interview has me, thanking the person for coming on, and then, talking about where you can find their material, how you can connect with them, stuff like that. And so the editing, once it gets done, it's I just put all the shots in there through iMovie, and then I just kind of pare down where I need to. Yes,
I really love the editing process quite a bit.
I do too. It's a little frustrating sometimes with regards to the kind of technology. See, like I say that I do all my editing on iMovie, and I do, right. But I'm doing all my editing on my phone. My phone is my studio. I don't have a MacBook Pro. I don't have a full size desktop size Mac, right, or anything like that. All I have is my phone, right, and everything goes into that. So right. When you have fat thumbs like I do, and a 4.5 inch screen, that you have your some physical limitations there.
I can relate. Yeah. Before I started using Adobe Premiere Pro, I kind of had very similar situations too. Before, you mentioned the writing community on Twitter, how it's kind of big on Twitter. And, one person that we have in common is Joshua Lee Ronin. And that's actually how we kind of became aware of each other. Because Joshua Lee Ronin features both of our work on his radio station, Ronin Radio.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw you on there. And you reached out to me too. And, I just saw that you actually interviewed Joshua recently. And I think you did a really great job. And that was cool because it's prepping me for when I'm going to get to interview him too.
Yeah. This is actually kind of the second time that Josh and I have connected for any kind of interview process. I connected with Josh several months ago through Twitter. I saw he was a writer and a creative type, and that's what I try to connect with. Like, when I'm on social media, I really try to avoid connecting with anybody else who is not in the writing community. It sounds really, really kind of elitist, but the goal is to connect with writers, not to get political, not to get, philosophical or anything like that. These are the writers are my people. We kind of, even if we have different backgrounds and stuff like that, there's kind of a similar sense of humor. Mostly, Twitter is one of those minefields of you say the wrong thing, or people misunderstand the tone with which you're writing something. They can completely blow it out of proportion. I connected with Josh. One of the things I really appreciate is the fact that he's a U.S. veteran. I like to be as supportive of veterans as possible. I live in a military area. We have a Navy base like 20 miles away. Right. So I deal with a lot of military personnel, out in the community. And so he invited me to come onto his podcast to talk about my stuff, and I wanted to return the favor in some way, shape, or form. Oh, awesome. So I invited him because I knew he was writing a book, and I wanted to bring him on and interview for that. And then shortly after his interview aired in mid-July, he sends me a text message through Twitter saying, "Hey, I'd like to incorporate your material from your vlogs in my radio station." I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah, heck yeah. You were saying that you want to support military members. I know that you just actually interviewed Tyler EC Burnworth too.
Yes.
A little while ago. And I think Tyler's great. I think you did a fantastic job with him too.
Thank you. Yeah, that between that episode, which just aired on Saturday, just 2 days ago, and the episode that I did the week before with British author Amy C Beckingsale, both of those interviews have just shot up my analytics. So I'm like, that's great. That's exciting. One of the things I did in my interview with Tyler is I made sure that thanking him for his service, and because I know that he's currently active duty reserve. So
yeah, when you're setting up these interviews, right? Is there a personal goal that you have for the interviews with the authors?
With the interviews, my goal is less about me and more about what I can do to help support and promote these other authors. As an indie author, I really know I personally know the struggle of trying to get myself out there, trying to promote, especially when you're on a budget. Yeah. And there's kind of this mainstream idea that in most creative circles, whether it's music, movies, TV, or even publishing, and that we have to compete against one another.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really toxic mindset to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I personally used to be guilty about.
Mm-hmm.
When Christopher Paolini released his Inheritance cycle, Aragon and Eldest, and I've read through all 4 of the books. They're good. I'm pretty sure he ripped off most of Star Wars to write the books. Right. But my dad found it. He thought it would be right up my alley, which it was. Mm-hmm. And I picked up the first book and I looked at the interior with the map right there in the front cover, and I just had a fit because it looked almost identical to the map that I had initially drawn for my stuff. Oh, and I'm like, son of a gun, he's been reading my notes. And that's not the last time that I've had something like that happen. I watched your video on the Old Guard. Right. I love that movie, but back in my college days, I was like 10, 15 years ago, I was working on something very similar. And I'm like, holy cow, Greg Rucka just stole my idea.
Yeah. Oh, dang.
But he published it first, so he gets the credit. But when I realized that other authors were my support and not my competition, that brought me to a point of clarity. And I figured instead of just using my channel to promote and advertise for events that I'm doing or what I'm doing with my books, I want to have that opportunity to help other writers. And being in education, really enjoying creative writing, I wanted to create that opportunity and that atmosphere. So that's where the interviews came out of, and that's why I started doing the Creators Corner segment with the writing tips, because I know that there are a lot of students out there that are kind of, and writers in general, who are unsure of what to do and what the rules are. And really, when you're a writer, there are no rules. But I had the opportunity to sub, because I do a lot of substitute teaching. I subbed for a creative writing teacher, and he had a couple of students that were struggling because while he was teaching them creative writing skills, there were certain nuances that you don't get in a high school creative writing class, or that they weren't getting at the time. Yeah. And not to say that that teacher didn't know what he was doing. He actually knew very much what he was doing. But there are some questions that a lot of the students had. And so since I was a published author, they started asking me those questions. They started connecting with me on Instagram and social media. And I'm like, that's awesome. Hey, and so I started reaching out. I'm like, what kind of questions do you guys have? What are some issues that you guys want to have dealt with? Because then it gives me something to add to my videos.
Uh-huh. Well, you know what? It looks like you have some karma because you've been helping all these other people talk about their works, So why don't we talk about your works right here? You're a self-published author, right? And you've published 4 books so far, right?
Well, 5 if you count the ebook of original poetry. Oh, okay. That's out there on Kindle. Okay. That was some stuff that I wrote during my college days, and I just decided to, combine it into one manuscript. And it's out there. It's like $2.99 on Kindle. So I've got 4 books in the series. The series is called The Archives of Icínq-Régn. Icínq-Régn means the 5 kingdoms. And so my sales tagline is dragons, elves, and magic and vampires that don't sparkle. Because I kind of incorporate a little bit of everything from the fantasy genre, right? The things that I enjoy. That's really what happened is I started writing. I really originally started writing the series more than 20 years ago when I was in high school. Oh, okay. A lot of the characters I was developing as comic book characters, and kind of like Tyler, I'm not terribly good at drawing. I mean, I can draw, but unless the character is wearing a helmet or a full face mask, it doesn't really look good. I can't draw faces, right. And I have difficulty with feet. So, so I started looking at writing the characters as literary characters, and I felt that the fantasy genre was the best way to adapt them from being modern superhero and supervillain characters to the genre that I'm doing now. And a lot of the characters are kind of throwbacks or homages to things that I'm a fan of myself in some way, shape, or form.
It's kind of interesting that you bring that up, and compared yourself to Tyler too, because I feel like the three of us are kind of in a similar boat. I have been inspired by comics too. I kind of wanted to write comics, and just like what you were saying, I can't really draw at all.
Yeah.
But I've always felt like, writing a novel would be the next best step. Because it's like I'm the only one that's responsible for it. I don't have to pay an artist to draw it. Well, can you go into the archives a little bit more and give us a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, so the series starts off with a prologue that's set 200 years before the events of the rest of the series, and it starts with the warlord of this guy named Menenias. He's the first halfling, first half human, half elf. So he has the best traits of both races, and before he dies, he makes this prophecy that his heirs would finish what he starts. Which part of what he started was the complete eradication of dragons. Like, he was so dead set into the destruction and extinction of the dragons that he almost succeeds. Mm-hmm. And the prologue goes into some of that. And so because he sets this prophecy, no one really believes it, because he was never seen around, having like any concubines or wives or any lovers around him. Never had any children that he was seen raising or mentoring or anything like that. So a lot of people just kind of brush it off, and they started rebuilding. And so that region had been one kingdom at one point, and then they kind of broke it up into 5 sections. And that's where we get the 5 kingdoms. So the kingdoms operate kind of like the EU. They're separate kingdoms, separate countries, separate borders, I should say. And then they have open borders with each other and a singular currency. But they have their own forms of government and how they do things. So like one kingdom, most of the kingdoms are landlocked. The one that isn't has a strong navy, but not a strong land-based military. Okay. So they kind of they protect and guard the shores of the country. And those aquatic borders. Then the northernmost region is where the elves originated from and where they remained after the whole thing with Menenias. They took in some of the human refugees, which is where the halfling race came into being. Okay. And so they've still set up. And so the name of their kingdom literally means the land of magic, because they're the most prominent magic users. Okay. There isn't much magic happening outside of that kingdom, though there are some magic users. Mm-hmm. There's another kingdom on the farthest east area, which is a theocracy. Okay. Kind of based off of, it's almost based off of like the Vatican type of structure, where you've got like the king is like the head of the country, but then they're kind of assisted by the head priest, mm-hmm. who's based out of a monastery. And so should something happen to the king and the royal family, that priest takes on being king. Oh, okay. And then a new priest is brought in. Mm-hmm. And so one of my characters from my first book was raised in that monastery. And then the 4th kingdom has only one city, which was the site of that last battle in the prologue. The rest of the kingdom is just desert. And then the largest kingdom, which is dead center, is called Chi-Sen, and it's based on ancient Rome. That was the inspiration behind this particular kingdom. And its borders, it has a wall going out to its borders. And it's broken into different districts. It's governed by a senate run by a chancellor. Mm. Wow. Okay. So, I mean, it sounds like you go into great depth about the whole world in your stories. And I noticed that in your YouTube videos that you have videos where you explain these things in detail, right? Yes. And one of the things that I did is, as the books expand at the mythos and everything, you get to encounter different elements from these kingdoms as well as other countries. Yeah. So there's references throughout book 1, 2, and 3, and even 4 to another country called Ronso, which is across the sea west of the 5 kingdoms. And Ronso it's its own separate empire. It's got its own government and stuff like that. And while elements of Ronso are mentioned or explored very, very briefly, the book that I'm writing now, book 5, actually allows the reader to explore that region geographically. Like, characters actually go there. You get to see what it's like, how the culture is broken down. You get to see more of the language, more of the architecture, stuff like that.
Yeah. The first 4 books, are they a complete story by themselves?
Yes and no. Each story is kind of isolated. The way I structured it is that the first 4 books cover one generation of characters.
Okay.
Because where I'm at with book 5 jumps ahead 20 years.
Okay.
And so because of the way I have it structured, you have book 1 that kicks off with this prologue, 200 years in the past, and then chapter 1 picks up in the here and now. Okay. And then it progresses, and then where book 1 leaves off, book 2 immediately picks up. And I did that specifically because book 2 is actually supposed to be a larger part of book 1, but because of how large that story was, it needed to be kind of just sectioned out and made into its own story, and I reworked part of the ending and stuff like that. And then book 3 actually happens concurrently with the events of book 2. Okay. And so where book 3 picks up is actually about a third of the way through book 2. And then book 4, parts of book 4, or what starts off book 4, actually take place right at the tail end of book 3. Okay. And then it's its own separate thing. It actually takes place outside of the 5 kingdoms. There's a lot of references to it, and things that have happened in the 5 kingdoms. Yeah. And you get a little bit more backstory, especially with Menenius. Like, Menenius, even though he is technically dead, the shadow of his threat is still looming very much, and it's creeping back in. And you're able to see why he rose to power so quickly. Okay. I mean, you get part of that in that prologue from book 1, but you get more tidbits as the series progresses. Nice. And how he as even spiritually works behind the scenes.
Oh, okay, awesome. I love when you do a villain backstory. Just kind of showing this is where they come from.
Yeah, and the way I write my books is very much in the same way that you would see a comic book series or a graphic novel series, where you get certain things in the moment of whatever that story arc is, but then there are other scenes that come up later that flash back, and you're like, oh, that's where that connects.
As part of the world building for this epic series, you have I noticed that you have like a pronunciation guide for your characters and the places. So, like, what inspired the actual language and the wording for the 5 kingdoms?
Well, when I did the initial writing, a lot of it was like, I would just put in parentheses or in quotation marks what something meant. Okay. And I'm like, that just sounds so generic. It sounds so stupid. Okay. I mean, that's the kind of thing that like really bad fantasy would incorporate. And so I wanted to make it a little bit more believable. So I'm kind of a polyglot. I've learned different languages over the years through living in Japan. My grandmother is from Italy. I've taken Spanish. For my master's degree, I took biblical Hebrew. So I've had exposure to all these different languages, and it just intrigues me because languages are such a huge part of culture. They make the culture even more rich than they are. Yeah. And even though I'm not a linguist like Tolkien is, I wanted to draw inspiration from those real languages. So like each different race or species of creature has their language based off of languages that exist today or have existed in the past. So like the dwarf language is based on German. Okay. I used Latin as the basis for the dragons. French and Italian were used for the elves because it's very beautiful, very flowing, very poetic. Right. With the vampires, I used Castilian Spanish. Like with Ronso, with that kingdom, I actually based that kingdom off of ancient Greek and Japanese culture. So there's kind of a fusion in the architecture. There's a fusion in the structure of their government to some extent. But the language especially, I will actually when I'm looking to translate a word or a phrase into Ronsonian, I will actually translate it. I'll have it, the English translation. Then in my notes, I'll write the Greek translation, and then I will write the Japanese translation. The translations are Romanized, so I can see the pronunciation, and then I'll kind of pick and choose which syllables I want to use, and kind of just make it a hodgepodge.
Wow, I love the attention to detail, man. This is awesome. Yeah,
I'm a nerd. It's what I do.
Yeah, I can relate. Yeah. So, I'm going to leave a link to your website and to your YouTube channel. I'm going to leave all your information in the description below. On your website or on your YouTube channel, you have like top 10 lists that you were just talking about, right? I know it was like top 10 fantasy books, right? Just tell me at least 2 or 3 other top 10 lists you got on there.
I did one a couple months ago, top 10 Westerns.
Okay.
Which was really fun. I did that kind of in honor of my grandfather, who was a big fan of Westerns, especially Western movies. Top 10 comedic reads, where I looked at books that are just absolutely hilarious, written either by comedians or by people who just have a good sense of humor. I've done top 10 sci-fi, some good stuff in there.
Sci-fi books or movies?
Sci-fi books.
Okay.
Most of the recommendations that I do with my top 10 list is focused solely on books.
Okay.
However, when I do a lot of my creative writing tips for the Creators Corner segment, I will actually pull from movies, because that visual medium allows for me to kind of give an example without having to go into too much verbal detail.
Good. Do you have a comic book top 10?
Comic book top 10 off the top of my head. I'm actually going to go with graphic novels.
Okay. I want to see if I've read them and if I put them in my top 10. You ready?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So number 10, I would have to actually say Batman versus Predator, the first one.
Okay. Yes. Okay. That's
DC and Dark Horse. It was one of their first pairings. They did 2 or 3 more. It was Amazing Spider-Man number 2 or volume 2. It was a collection of issues from the early 2000s. It was the one where Aunt May finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. It's also the volume that has the 9/11 issue.
Okay, so that was written by J. Michael Straczynski, right? Like the guy that did Avalon 5? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was also one of the head writers on the Real Ghostbusters too.
Right. Okay, so that would probably be in my top 5 Spider-Man runs. Like of Spider-Man writers. I love J. Michael Straczynski's run. It's hard saying his name. All right.
Number 8, I would say Watchmen.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And it's not in the top 5 only because I think it's been kind of publicized to death.
Yeah, I wouldn't put Watchmen in my top 10.
Oh yeah,
personally, it's not like a personal favorite. I know that it's like The Godfather or Citizen Kane.
Right.
Personal favorite.
Yeah. I would actually have to say Batman Year One.
Hell yes.
That's a terrific book.
That is.
I think Warner Brothers Animation did a pretty good job with adapting it to animation.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it was the fodder for Batman Begins with Christopher Nolan,
right,
directing it. And so I it's a top one in there. In fact, a lot of my top books are going to be
Batman
oriented, because he's one of my favorate characters.
You wearing a Green Lantern shirt.
I picked green as the color theme for the day.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And I hadn't worn it in a few weeks, so I'm like, let's go with Green Lantern. Nice. I do like Green Lantern though.
Me too.
He's one of my favorites.
Same here.
Let's see. I'm actually a big fan of, like I said, Fathom, Michael Turner. So he's going to be my number 6 pick.
Okay.
I've actually got that first graphic novel where it shows you how everything kicks off, and It's such a good book. It's a little hard to understand if you're not familiar with the material, but as you read through it, and it's pretty dense, especially with the narrative. Definitely worth the read, and the art is just fantastic.
Nice.
Number 5 is going to be Origin, the Marvel, the Wolverine Origin that Marvel put out back in 2000.
Nice.
That was like a 5 or 6 issue series. I was reading it as digital comics on the Marvel website before they started changing that up for money.
Nice.
And when they came out with a full edition, I got the hardback with the dust cover and everything, and it's just, oh man, the art, Andy Kubert's art is just phenomenal.
Yes,
in
it
that.
is.
I love the way he draws. The next three are actually going to be all Batman. Actually the next four are. So
Okay.
number 4 is Haunted Night. It's one of the Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale books. It's kind of what I consider a trilogy.
Wait, is it Haunted Night or is it Long Halloween?
You're thinking of The Long Halloween, which is the first book in that trilogy.
Okay.
Which actually Long Halloween's number 2 for me.
Okay.
Because of how good it is.
Yes, that's excellent. Yeah. And that's kind of the foundation for The Dark Knight in a lot of ways. The movie The Dark Knight.
Yes. The Dark Knight. Yeah, it was based on that book. Haunted Night deals with some of the issues that Batman was dealing with in the wake of Jason Todd's death.
Okay.
And he was haunted by those ghosts and people who have died, for him. And Scarecrow is a big element in that book. The other one was Dark Victory.
Yeah, that's great.
And so Dark Victory is my number 3 pick.
Okay.
Because it's so good, because it goes into, it shows some of the lengths that Batman will go
right
to win.
Right.
Obviously, we talked about Long Halloween being number 2.
Right.
That was such a good book, and actually inspired me to write a Batman fanfic that takes place over the course of a year. I create a completely new villain that actually kind of piggybacks off of some of the antics that some of the Rogues Gallery will use when they're trying to get his attention. But there was kind of a reason for that. My number 1 pick is Batman Hush.
Okay. That's a good one too. The art in that.
It's a very good one.
Yeah.
I've got it in the 2-part. I don't have the full collection. I've got it just in the 2-part. But such a good, rich story where it incorporates every villain that Batman's ever dealt with. The writing on it is just intensely insane.
Yeah.
And Jim Lee's art, just
Yes.
Oh my gosh, so good.
I think we have a couple top 10 connections there. Definitely with the Batman stuff. See, it's fun because I put you on the spot, but then I'm trying to think of my top 10. It's kind of hard, like in the moment while we're doing this recording. But yeah, I'll have to bust out my top 10 maybe next time we do a video together.
Absolutely. And if you want to talk comic books, I mean, I did my background for my bachelor's degree in comic literature, and I think I shared with you that part of my experience with college, I got to write off like hundreds of dollars of graphic novels as textbooks.
That is awesome, man. Yeah. I wish I had thought of that.
It was a brilliant part of creative mathematics on my end, because my mom does taxes, and so she was in the process of doing hers and my dad's taxes, and I was still under their, as a college student, I was still under them for a spell. My dad's like, well, how are we going to deal with this? Because you're just buying these I'm like, textbooks. He's like, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm down for just talking about comics for a whole episode sometime.
I can totally do that.
Yeah.
I can totally do that. Movies, comics, you name it.
Yeah, it's kind of my shtick.
Yeah, it's a good stick to have.
That's pretty much it, I think, as far as interview goes. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Or?
If anybody wants to read my books, my links are going to be in the description for your video. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome.
Although, there is one thing I want to promote. This coming Saturday, I have a post on Patreon going live for anyone who wants to be a channel supporter of my YouTube channel.
Nice.
For as little as $1 a month, you can log on. You can have access to this, and it's new cover art for my books. I'm releasing. I just released the new cover art for my first book. The second piece of cover art is being broadcast this coming Saturday, but also on this Saturday, that secret, patron only opportunity, that sneak peek, is going to be available for the next 2 books. And then I'm going to broadcast those in a couple of weeks.
So, Garrett, I really appreciate you coming on here. Thanks when I put you on the spot, coming up with that list. That was awesome.
glad I could help with that.
Yeah. And we'll definitely have you on again sometime, and I'll come on your channel too at some point.
I would love to have you.
Thanks for watching this interview with Garrett K. Jones. The audio for each one of these author interviews will be on the website of writer Joshua Lee Ronin, where he has his own radio station known as Ronin Radio. And of course, we have more episodes of the Lastercast coming up and Ramblings from the Rod Pod. So please, if you haven't at this point, like and subscribe. Thanks so much. Please stay safe.